Hi everyone, hi, it's Eddie. Hey, I'm going to do this first episode of Erudition Network, and we're going to talk about the black film history. We're going to go a little bit into the four eras of black film. Those are the slave, mammy, animal era, the new Negro era, and the black exploitation era. And finally, probably not today, but in another episode, we're going to talk about the modern era. But I'm going to try to do it in a very summarized manner so that we don't dwell too deeply, so questions can be asked. But I want to tell you, since the beginning of film, blacks were used as props. We bucked and we danced and Yosemite all around the screen. We were encouraged to do this. And this was before the Birth of a Nation film that we hear so much about in black history. We were seen as animals in films. In fact, Thomas Edison's early films of 1894 and 1896, the Watermelon Contest and the Sioux Ghost Dance, which took whites dancing around in blackface, were some early examples of racial caricature in film. And they opened the way to Birth of a Nation, which in turn opened up the floodgates for black stereotypes for the next 100 years. The era is known as the slave, mammy, and animal era. It was the period in film up until Gone with the Wind that blacks were film props and devices in film. We carry trays. We act like animals. The mammies were such a popular character of that time that they appeared in over 600 films of that era, both short and long films. The other popular character was the lazy, buck-eyed, dancing, jigaboo, stymie Sambo character. And he appeared in cartoons, books, and films. He was a feed-over of the earlier slave era. This also introduced Tarzan, the white man who ruled over the blacks. This myth was what a white man woman child could master anything that a black character could do in seconds and be better than them who have been doing whatever for years. That'd be dancing, working, whatever. He was also then viewed as the savior of this darky. Examples of that would be Shirley Temple movies supported this type of story, where she would dance better than the black man with Bojangles. These stories and characters were used for almost 40 years, up until 1939. And supposedly, this is considered one of the greatest eras of film before World War II. The slave, mammy, animal era lasted 45 years and then came to an end when we started the new Negro era. Now, the new Negro era started after World War II. What is that? Well, it was a humanized version of the black man. See, he was still not equal to the white man, but he could sometimes talk back. He could show anger. But he could never challenge the lead character. If you notice in movies like Gone with the Wind, Mammy talks back a lot, but she's still a Mammy. And if she goes too far, she is put in her place by one of the white characters. She is laughed at, and she's never taken seriously as a real person. The new Negro era was made possible because the government wanted blacks to fight in World War II. That is the truth. They needed everyone that they could to have to win the war and chip in when lives are being lost. To do this, they stopped writing the black man as an animal and made him to have some aspects of humanity. The funny thing about this, however, is that they used fewer blacks in those movies. How? Well, see, the new Negro era fostered movies like Pinky, Lost Boundaries, Imitation of Life. Listen to that name, Imitation of Life, which are movies that portrayed white actors who were passing blacks, civilized blacks. They were mulattoes, they were light-skinned. And it was funny because these white actors acting like blacks were treated unfairly, but not bad in the movies. They were seen as victims who were suffering because they were actually secretly black and they were embarrassed about it, as if this was a problem. Then there was a film like Black Like Me, where a white man paints his face to see what a black man's life is like. But yet, he is treated more unfairly by blacks who find out he's white in the end. Crazy, right? The new Negro era was a way to convince blacks they were human but not equal. The actual blacks that appeared in films of that time either carried a tray, did a dance, and played the fool, just like the earlier animal era. But the new Negro was mistreated, yet he would take a beating. He would take a bullet. He would take any abuse, but he would always defend that white character. Oh, and also they could dance and entertain him and make him feel good about himself. Lastly, a little known fact about black entertainers of that time is that they were often used only as the studio saw fit. If they got too uppity with the studio, then they could be fired, right? Their scenes were filmed in a way that they could be cut out or not even seen in the actual wide distribution of the film. Though that was a lot going on in that era, and that was a way for them to cut us out of the movies when our actors or entertainers got too high on themselves. The Hollywood responded by giving stronger new Negro characters like Sidney Poitier and No Way Out, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and the Defiant Ones in the 1950s and 1960s. But still, as blacks came home from the war, they found that they were treated just as badly, if not worse, than when they left. So what did they do? They stopped going to films until Hollywood again made a change. And one of the reasons why the new Negro era became so popular toward the end is because they had to make that change. And then we had movies like The Dirty Dozen, where they had blacks in there, rough and tough. And as the Civil Rights era blew up in Hollywood through a bone to let black filmmakers start to make their own films, with less money, mind you, but they wanted them to take it a little bit further so they could bring blacks back into film. And that's when we came into the black exploitation era. In the early 70s, filmmakers like Gordon Parks, Melvin Van Peebles, and Ossie Davis were given shoestring budgets to direct black films. The problem is they were PR attempts. They turned a profit even though they were given fewer theaters. Gordon directed The Learning Tree, Melvin directed The Watermelon Man, and Ossie Davis directed Cotton Comes to Harlem. But due to the lack of control of these projects and the turmoil of the time, Dr. King had been killed, Malcolm X had been killed, the Black Panther Party were being killed, and Black America was burning to the ground. A filmmaker like Melvin Van Peebles raised money and took $50,000 from a loan from Bill Cosby to make the revolutionary film Sweet Sweetback's Bad-Ass Song. This was the birth of black exploitation, but at the time it wasn't exploitive. See, the characters were ultra-violent and just almost criminal. The difference is that Sweetback had a purpose to his violence. And it was a truthful example of the things that were going on in the streets in the black community. Sweetback wanted to rebel against the white imperialistic society. But see, Hollywood saw the explosion of Sweetback, and it created a marked down formula from it that persisted for about 15 years after that. When we talk about black exploitation, we saw films like Cleopatra Jones, Foxy Brown, Three the Hard Way, and you can go on and on, Dolomite. The funny thing is, all these movies, about these movies, is that they were directed by white men and not blacks. They were directed by white directors loyal to the studio, not trying to tell a truthful story, but trying to bring the audience in who had gone to support Sweetback. But if you look at Shaft and Sweetback, you can see powerful characters fighting for their neighborhoods and livelihood who were not criminals, but strong black characters. But in the other movies, they were caricatures and stereotypes. The hardened black to the old Negro characters of earlier eras, the new Negro. The longer the period went on, the worse the subject matters got. Pimps and drug dealers and criminals. It was a dupe. And black culture started to act like the ignorant characters that they saw in black exploitation films. We went from Sweetback to Dolomite. And it was a sad time in our era in film. The exploitation films stopped, but the stereotypes were now rooted in our young black people's minds. So from 1979 up until the mid-80s, gangsters, pimps, and hustlers, whores, and thugs archetypes were rampant in film. That's what America saw black people as. But exploitation was the exploiting of black people by white directors. And it hadn't started that way. When we look at The Animal, The New Negro, and the black exploitation era, we see how film in our country modified itself to keep blacks going to the movies while still treating them as unequal. We see how people accepted unequal treatment. And today, as we go into the modern era, much of that has not changed. We are still characters who have to accept some kind of disformity, some kind of unequalness in order to survive in the film world. And what does this teach us as human beings? In the animal era, it told us that we were not human. In the new Negro era, it told us that we could talk to whites, but only in order to serve them. In the black exploitation era, it taught us that, yeah, we could be angry about the system, but that would make us go violent and do violent things and drugs and accept a wayward path. When I talk about film, it's a history. It upsets me. And I wanted to share that with you in this episode of Erudition because we need to understand that. Now, there is a whole nother era called the modern era. And we will cover that in another broadcast. But I wanted to hit those three and give you a little summary of what they did. As always, please ask questions. Hit us on our YouTube page. Hit us on our Facebook page. Share this video. Come and be a part of your erudition. Thank you for giving me these few moments to share this small history of black film with you. And I hope you learned something from it. God bless you, and we'll see you next time on Erudition.